So, the Black Panther movie is okay. It has an interesting setting, plot, and characters, it has some good action scenes, and some character development and plot progression. However, it is hardly a great movie, especially when compared to the likes of Iron Man, Thor Ragnarok, or Captain America Civil War. The movie is predictable, it lacks its intended nuance, and it feels somewhat tame, barely touching upon the themes it wants to explore. In fact, all of those flaws are best represented by the movie's villain, Killmonger, whose character leaves a lot to be desired. What could have been an interesting, nuanced, and somewhat persuasive villain ends up being an inconsistent and one-dimensional plot device. I believe that Killmonger's character and the role of his character in the Black Panther movie is Marvel's biggest missed opportunity. With just a few changes, Killmonger becomes a much better villain, which makes the Black Panther the movie it always intended to be. Let's talk about that. Before we address the reasons why Killmonger is Marvel's biggest missed opportunity, we must first understand the themes and message of the movie, both within the context of the story and its characters, as well as at the meta-narrative level. There are three themes tackled by the Black Panther movie. The first is tradition against modernity, the second is inaction against action, and the third is that of racial struggles and inequality. As you can tell, two of these themes have an opposite side to them, and they are represented by our protagonist and antagonist respectively. When it comes to the struggle between tradition and modernity, the side of tradition is represented by T'Challa. Throughout the movie, we see him honoring the traditions of Wakanda. He fights M'Baku in ritual combat in order to become king, and honors Killmonger's challenge as a rightful heir to the throne. T'Challa has a personal, positive rapport with his people, and he struggles to be as good of a king as possible for them. The Black Panther begins the movie as a true force of tradition, sticking to the rules of his country and his people almost too rigidly, afraid to question anything. On the opposite side, we have Killmonger. If T'Challa is a force of tradition and the old, Eric Killmonger represents modernity and the new. Born and raised in the United States, yet aware of Wakanda and its values, Killmonger never develops a desire to maintain tradition. On the contrary, he does not care for the traditions of Wakanda and its people, perceiving it as flawed, restrictive, and antiquated. He only engages with this culture until he gets what he desires, becoming king and burning any hope for a future Black Panther. Killmonger attempts to ignore and erase the traditions of Wakanda, changing its passive and complicit cultural values into active and violent ones instead. Which brings us to the movie's second theme, that of action against inaction. At the beginning of the movie, Wakanda is a completely independent and isolated country that only looks out for itself and its citizens. Apart from making an appearance at the Vienna International Center, which led to T'Chaka's death, Wakanda's only concern is itself. T'Challa desires to keep it that way, choosing to remain passive in regards to international affairs. When Nakia suggests Wakanda should help others by sharing knowledge and resources, T'Challa says,
"We are not like these other countries, Nakia. If the world found out what we truly are, what we possess, we could lose our way of life."
Then, when Killmonger suggests Wakanda should liberate people across the world, T'Challa replies,
"I am not king of all people, I am king of Wakanda. And it is my responsibility to make sure our people are safe and that vibranium does not fall into the hands of a person like you."
As far as the Black Panther is concerned, the hardships, struggles, and needs of the world are irrelevant to him, as they are not Wakanda and its people. However, Killmonger is the one that Wakanda and its people abandoned. He was the one whose father was killed and the one who had to fend for himself in a world that was not always kind and welcoming. Because of this, inaction is not an option for Killmonger, nor can he accept the inaction of the Wakandan people. He executes a plan in order to become king of Wakanda before attempting to use the country as a tool, aiming to arm all oppressed people so they can rise up and fight their oppressors. Killmonger's approach is the complete opposite of T'Challa's, ignoring Wakanda and its needs, focusing solely on the outside world. This leads us to the theme of racial injustice and inequality. I want to first address this at a meta-narrative level. The movie's significance in being an incredibly successful and popular movie with predominantly non-white cast and crew cannot be understated. The fact that this is rightfully so pointed out in articles such as this one, or this one shows the significance the movie has in terms of racial injustice and inequality in media. But the movie also tackles these topics as part of its story. Killmonger believes that it is Wakanda's duty to help all the oppressed people of African descent. Sure, Nakia talks about helping others, but she does so in a general sense. On the other hand, Killmonger's intentions are explicitly to liberate all oppressed individuals of African descent, stating things such as,
"It's about 2 billion people all over the world that looks like us, but their lives are a lot harder. Wakanda has the tools to liberate them all. You know where I'm from. When black folks started revolutions, they never had the firepower or the resources to fight their oppressors. Where was Wakanda?"
You might be thinking that T'Challa and Killmonger can't be on opposite sides in this regard. However, T'Challa grew up as heir to the throne of Wakanda and benefited from status, wealth, and help growing up, even when interacting with the outside world. Killmonger had no such luxury, making his struggles as a person of color much more palpable than any struggle T'Challa would have faced in the outside world. In truth, the movie seems to compare the approach of T'Challa with that of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who promoted integration in society and non-violent disobedience. Correspondingly, Killmonger's violent approach reflects the early perspectives of Malcolm X, an advocate of black nationalism that encouraged self-defense and toppling oppressive systems. For those that might doubt this intentional comparison was made, do recall the movie ends with T'Challa agreeing to help and support others, integrating Wakanda in international matters, while Killmonger aimed to violently liberate all those that were oppressed. It is at this point that you start doubting me. If those themes and comparisons are represented so well by Killmonger, how could he be Marvel's biggest missed opportunity? Well, that is because his character is inconsistent, one-dimensional, and used as a plot device for T'Challa's growth. We have already established that Killmonger's goal is to liberate all people of African descent by arming them with vibranium weapons. His one purpose is to liberate the oppressed. Then, what is this line doing in the movie?
"I killed in America, Afghanistan, Iraq. I took life from my own brothers and sisters right here on this continent."
This is both hypocritical and worrying. If Killmonger wants to liberate the oppressed, why did he also kill them? Not to mention the obvious lack of empathy in his speech and the more obvious question of, did he count those kills on his body? But it is this unrelenting cruelty and lack of empathy that ruined the character. Killmonger kills his significant other without showing any sadness, and he visibly feels joy after killing enemies in combat. He burns the magical plant of Wakanda, disrespecting the culture and the people without thinking about the future. And because he is portrayed as a one-dimensional villain, any nuance and righteousness that could be found in his goal and in the movie's approach to racial injustice is stripped away. For the audience, Killmonger acts like a villain and has violent plans, which reinforces the hero status and stance of T'Challa. There is no reason for the audience to look deeper into this or understand Killmonger because the movie doesn't ask us to. This is tame and a missed opportunity for a movie that clearly wants to talk about racial injustice and inequality. We can't empathize with Killmonger because his stance is not explored in depth and he is not a likable character. This means that we have a side that is right and one that is wrong. Compare this to Civil War and its approach to the Sokovia Accords, which divided characters and fans alike. Or compare Killmonger to Thanos, whose regret and solemn nature made people question whether he was the villain. Black Panther lacks this nuance and depth, but it can be regained with a few changes to Killmonger's character. There are many ways through which Killmonger can become the character he was always meant to be, which would in turn make the Black Panther movie more complex and nuanced. The first method would be showing us more of his journey. If we were to see Eric's journey, preferably as flashbacks throughout the movie, showing the struggles he faced growing up and the moments that radicalized him, we would see the character as more layered and understandable. But this would not remove the anger and the lack of empathy that make him such an unlikable and one-dimensional character. So we're going to make a few changes. Remember this line?
I took life from my own brothers and sisters right here on this continent.
Yeah, we're cutting that out. Remember when he ordered the plants to be burned and was aggressive to his people, showing no empathy or care for Wakanda and its future? Instead, our Killmonger will lock the plant from away. He will decree that only he and someone he trusts, say W'Kabi, will have access to it, as he wants any future children to also be the Black Panther. Then we will humanize Killmonger. When he kills his significant other, he is visibly sad. When he kills his enemies in combat, he does not feel joy. And he talks about his liberation plan with a heavy heart, understanding there will be innocents hurt, but believing that is the price worth paying. Finally, we'll mention that the marks on his body are only tracking kills of oppressive people and regimes, fully removing the hypocrisy and the bloodlust of the character. By making all of these changes, we turn Killmonger into a more complex, layered, and likable character. He may be in a position of T'Challa, but he is not just a force of evil. Instead, Killmonger becomes a force of modernity and action, changing the culture and approach of Wakanda rather than destroying it. His reasoning and struggles are understood by the audience, which makes us question if he really is the villain. At least, that's what I would have done. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching, keep writing.